Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're here today to talk about what does the coronavirus pandemic mean for large events in Louisiana, like Halloween and Mardi Gras. So this is a live Q&A, and I have with me two distinguished guests that I'd like to introduce you to. So we have Jeff Adelson, who is a reporter for the Times-Picayune and New Orleans Advocate. We also have Jeff Asher, NOLA.com contributor and data analyst with AH Datalytics. And so they're here to talk about data, about what that means for large events when it comes to the spread of the coronavirus in the state of Louisiana. So I'm going to start by talking about Halloween. So Jeff Adelson, you talked with the mayor today about Halloween in the city of New Orleans and about impending lifting of restrictions in the city of New Orleans. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned today? Oh, we don't have your audio there.
There you go.
Uh-oh. Sorry, guys, bear with us. Troubleshooting some technical issues. In the meantime, while we work on that, if you have questions for Jeff Adelson or Jeff Asher about coronavirus data, about what it means for events like Halloween and Mardi Gras, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later in the show, you can drop those into the chat and we may answer your question live on air. So all you have to do is add your question to the comments and we'll see that and we'll grab and answer that question.
Can you all hear me now?
We can. Great.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So the mayor had a press conference this morning where she discussed, sort of gave another bit of a preview of an announcement that's expected tomorrow on a broader lifting of restrictions in New Orleans. One bit of news that came out of it was that she discussed what her thoughts are on Halloween. And at the moment, what the mayor said was that she's not going to be looking at too many restrictions on trick-or-treating or other traditional Halloween activities, with the argument, and this is something Asher and I have talked about before, that number one, you're talking about largely outdoor activities when you're talking about trick-or-treating, and outdoor activities are considered to be among the safer activities that people can engage in without spreading the virus. The other point she brought up is obviously for Halloween, you're usually wearing masks anyway, and different kind of masks than you need to prevent coronavirus, but shouldn't be much of a challenge to get masks integrated into that. So basically, according to the mayor, there are going to be some guidelines the city's going to put out, some advice on how to handle Halloween safely, but we should be seeing trick-or-treating and other traditional activities come the end of next month. Now, another question for New Orleans is exactly how it's going to handle the plans for reopening. And city officials have been teasing this since last week when they said they're looking through the data, the numbers have looked good. It's possibly almost time for the city to start loosening restrictions. And for those of you who don't know, New Orleans currently is the only parish that's still in phase 2. That's because the mayor has wanted to keep the parish with higher restrictions than the rest of the state to see what would happen with school reopenings. So far, those school reopenings, which started with pre-K through fourth graders, started at the beginning of the month. There haven't really been any changes in the city's coronavirus data. So we started to see the first indications of reopening last week when the mayor lifted a ban on restaurants serving go-cups. And that ban was put in place largely to prevent people from gathering outside of bars or on Bourbon Street, places like that. But there's a number of restrictions that are still a lot stricter than the rest of the state. Bars themselves are still closed. There's still limits on occupancy and indoor gatherings. So it's sort of unclear what the city will be announcing probably tomorrow when they talk about reopening. But the mayor did indicate that it's not going to be one leap into phase 3 or one leap to catch up to the rest of the state. What we're probably going to see is a sort of incremental approach with more and more restrictions lifted to get to something closer to what we're seeing in the rest of the state. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. It'll be interesting to see what the timeline the mayor sets out. Given the cautious take that the city administration has taken on all of this, I wouldn't expect any of those timelines to be necessarily quick or dramatic. I think we're going to see a very deliberate move into looser restrictions.
Jeff Adelson, you talked a little bit there about bars and how bars still in Orleans Parish cannot open, but what we've seen in the past few weeks with the governor's lift on restrictions on bars, we started to see more and more bars in other parishes across the state of Louisiana open as they reach that threshold that the governor set for percent positivity. So can you talk a little bit about what we've seen happening with bars across the state?
Sure. So a little more than 2 weeks ago, the governor said that bars can reopen in parishes that have had 2 weeks in a row of percent positivity below 5%. And that means that the percent of positive tests divided by the percent of total tests is under 5%. That's a relatively low rate, although it's worth noting it's still higher than White House and CDC guidelines for reopening bars. But there have been a number of parishes that have been allowed to reopen so far. In fact, at this point, there are about 29 parishes as of today out of 64 that are allowed to reopen. That includes about 14 new parishes this week, including East Baton Rouge is probably going to be most interesting to some of our readers. This is a graphic by our excellent graphics editor, Dan Swenson, showing exactly where things are. And as you can see, Orleans so far is one of the few parishes that has outright said we're not going to reopen bars. Most of the other parishes either have not yet qualified or have not, or in some cases don't have bars or things like that. So that's sort of the statewide stand. We've got another about dozen parishes you can see in yellow that are sort of poised to reopen next week if they have another week of good numbers. So we're going to be seeing a lot of reopening in the near future, and we'll see how it goes.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that update, Jeff. So so I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about Mardi Gras, because that was one of the big things, one of the big questions that we hear regularly is, are we going to have Mardi Gras in 2021? And Jeff Asher wrote a column that was published on NOLA.com this morning, and we've got some viewer questions on it. Here's one from Al Mackey. Do you think Mardi Gras could be possible? And so Asher, you wrote about that, and tell us a little bit about what you wrote today and what you've learned.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I don't know is I guess the answer. So I had a column up that went up this morning. The whole reason that I wrote it was just because I think it's a conversation that we need to have. And when you think about Mardi Gras, I'm as excited for Mardi Gras as I am for everything or anything in the year. And it really is, it's such an important festival for us economically. It's so important for the soul of New Orleans. But you think back to last February where we didn't know COVID was here. It's the type of thing where lots of people traveling from all over the country help spread it from everywhere. And then also once they come here, they get it and they take it other places. So it leads to spread elsewhere. It's the type of thing where you have lots of people in large crowds yelling and screaming, not necessarily wearing masks. It's the type of thing that is very conducive to being a super spreader event. And what we saw and people are coming in, they're staying in hotels, they're going to restaurants, all sorts of different things. So there's all sorts of reasons why Mardi Gras in February 2020 was one of the reasons that New Orleans was one of the country's epicenters. And we had a significantly harder hit in February than pretty much anywhere outside of New York, because most likely of Mardi Gras. Now, if you think about 2021, we'll have a lot of advantages that we didn't. One is that we know that it exists. We know that COVID is here. We have testing. The first test was not returned until March 10th, the first positive test. So we basically had a 3-week period where COVID was here and growing. There's one model that estimates that about 25,000 people had been infected in New Orleans by the time we got our first positive case. So we'll have testing then. We may even have rapid testing and widely available rapid testing, not just with nursing homes and schools and things and hospitals, but where the person on the street can get a rapid test that you can tell within 15, 20 minutes whether or not you have COVID. And then people are wearing masks. People are able to isolate. So there's reasons that we do have advantages, but the ideal Mardi Gras would essentially be a small parade where nobody comes from out of town and everyone has 6 to 10 feet across. And I guess you spray down with disinfectant each bead that comes your way. I mean, if you think about how to do it safely, there doesn't seem to be any way to do it without it becoming a super spreader event. But a lot can change in the next 4 months. I mean, 4 or 5 months. So it's also the type of thing that it's very plausible that we've made significant advancements, and in February we can actually hold it safely, but you also have to start planning far in advance. And so it's not the type of thing that I think you can turn on a dime. You need throws and you need logistics and all sorts of organizational issues. And so I guess, where I come down in the article is that I just don't see how it can happen. It's really depressing, but at least in the way that we're accustomed to it. That doesn't mean that we can't come up with some other way to celebrate the festival, to celebrate Carnival, but it's just looking out. It's going to be a really hard decision. And, as Jeff mentioned, we're just barely getting to the point where we're reopening bars. If you can imagine trying to do Mardi Gras in 4 months, I just don't know how it happens. The CDC had one of their comments from when they were looking at sort of the spread of COVID initially in the United States. Because COVID-19 is primarily transmitted by respiratory droplets, population density might play a significant role in the acceleration of transmission. And there's just no way to do Mardi Gras that doesn't damage the health of the city beyond sort of the liver damage that Mardi Gras normally does to the health of the city's occupants. I was trying to get that line into the piece and I couldn't, so I figured I'd say that here. Right now we're sort of at this low. We're feeling good about ourselves. We're phase 3 throughout the state. We're gonna reopen bars. We're probably gonna go to phase 3 at some point in New Orleans. And we know from openings here and basically everywhere that it's got a slow buildup. And so what we'll likely see is a slow increase of cases to where, places that thought they were good, New York City is starting to see the percent positive and the number of cases rise. Europe is seeing outbreaks. Israel is seeing outbreaks. All these places where you start to reopen before you don't have it completely under control, you start to see outbreaks. And the question is whether or not our countermeasures of testing, tracing, isolating, wearing masks, are those able to overcome whatever's an outbreak? And so we need to deal with what's to come in the next month, essentially, month and a half to 2 months, before we can really, I think, say that we could potentially safely do Mardi Gras.
If I can highlight 2 really good points I thought you brought up, but maybe deserve a little more discussion. One is that, as Asher pointed out, Mardi Gras takes a long time to put on, to just do all the logistics of planning and getting the floats and everything else. So one problem is we're dealing with a situation on the ground that's very uncertain as to what it's going to be in 4 months and could change rapidly over that time period. At the same time, you're dealing with crews who are trying to figure out whether they should go forward. People are trying to decide whether they should put in their deposits and their payments for the coming year and that sort of thing. And that creates a complication, right? So it's not just, do we think, on February 1st, we're going to be ready for Mardi Gras? Is all the planning going ahead now as if Mardi Gras is going to happen next year? The other issue that I think was really is really an important point here is, not only was Mardi Gras the likely reason that we got such dramatic spread here early this spring, but the mayor took a lot of heat for that. She was repeatedly being criticized in national media for not canceling Mardi Gras, and I think the local media all understood that basically the threat that was going on wasn't something that anyone could have foreseen back when Mardi Gras happened this year, but I would expect that would make the administration a bit gun shy this year of walking back into that kind of criticism. So I'm maybe a little more optimistic or uncertain than Jeff in terms of, I think there's a possibility something can happen. I think there's a lot of unknowns about what we can do, but I think there's also a lot of factors that are sort of weighing against, like Jeff is saying, that are weighing against Mardi Gras the way that we traditionally think of Mardi
So you both talked a little bit about the impact of some of the reopening things that we're seeing happen right now, moving into phase 3, the reopening of bars in some places. And I want to take a question from one of our readers here. Miranda asks, has there been any spike in positive COVID testing results in the parishes that are open? And I want to ask that question because I know the two of you were talking before about how long it can take before we start to see an impact on some of these things. So can you talk a little bit about that, about, when might we know the impact of some of the reopening measures that are happening right now, and what might get in the way of us being able to spot trends there?
Yeah, so we haven't seen any spike. We've been sort of at this low level that matches where we were in June, when after we had our first sort of wave that ended. So it's been good, but I don't think it's been long enough. It really, what we saw in a lot of states like Florida and Georgia and Texas that opened widely back in April and May, was that it really took almost 4 to 6 weeks, not the sort of, what you think of, it's 2 weeks from action to spike. And really it's a longer time frame, I think, because you can open up restaurants and bars, but people are not necessarily going to go in the level that they would normally. And so I think that there's the government action, and then there's the risk that people are willing to take. And I think that because people are aware of the risks, just because the government opens certain things does not mean that we're seeing people flock back to the things that are open. And so I think that sort of makes it a longer runway in terms of how long before we would see a potential spike. If we reach the end of October and things are exactly as they are now, I would feel a lot more confident that we haven't seen any repercussions from phase 3 and bars and whatnot reopening and schools coming back. But I guess I'm concerned that probably won't happen, just because we see everywhere that when places open, we see spikes. The question for me, at least, is not do we see a spike and when do we see a spike, but when we do see a spike, is it a big one, or is it small, kind of like what New Orleans had back in June and July, where it was a very manageable spike? I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Jeff.
No, I think that all is very, very much what we're looking at, and I think as you said, the big question is whether we've got a controllable spike, whether things get out of control. And this is something we actually discussed last week, but right now, or 2 weeks ago, I guess. Right now, the metrics for clamping down on bar openings are pretty loose. You have to more than double the percent positivity rate for 2 weeks in a row. And the way it's calculated, at that point, you're actually 3 weeks past it. So you've got to be at a fairly high level of infection in a parish in order for the state to come in and shut down the bars again. So I think one of the concerns, and something people should be watching out for, is the state could be relatively slow in shutting down, in reacting to outbreaks that do happen, which is sort of the flip side of right now. People do seem to be a little more cautious, or it's possible that just the infection rates are low enough that we're not seeing the kind of dramatic spread we saw back when we moved into phase 2. So there could be less of a immediate policy reaction to this, but it could start showing up in the data at some point.
So I want to get back briefly to the subject of Mardi Gras. I have another reader question here from D. Howard asking, would it be okay for Mardi Gras Indians to come out? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the sort of thing that we should be looking for, where it can be outdoors, people can spread. It's not going to draw a million tourists from all over the country. Things that can maybe be more appealing to locals and people in the area, and it's a great way to celebrate New Orleans and Mardi Gras. And I think that we should be looking at things like that don't involve enormous crowds gathering together and screaming at each other, as the things that we should be looking for to celebrate what's going to be one of the most unique Mardi Gras in our city's history.
Yeah, agree completely.
Well, if you have any other questions for Jeff Asher and Jeff Adelson, you can drop those in the chat here. As we get ready to wrap up here today, I just wanted to ask if you had any other insights to share this week. I know, Jeff Asher, one thing that you noted today on Twitter was the death trend in Orleans Parish in particular. So we've gone now how many days without a reported death in Orleans Parish?
Yeah, we're at 10 days without a death, which before this we hadn't gone 7 straight days since before the first death was announced on March 15th. So it's definitely an accomplishment. I think it speaks to how low the prevalence is right now, which doesn't mean that in, again, 4 weeks that we'll be saying the same thing. And also that a lot of our cases are driven by Tulane, where you're going to have younger people that are less likely to be hospitalized, less likely to have serious cases. And also, I think with university, it's easier to quarantine everything rather than if a school kid gets it, brings it home to parents who give it to the grandparents who bring it into work. There's a lot more of a chain of potential passing. So I think what we're seeing in our case numbers is that we quietly switched to a large percentage of our cases are coming from Tulane, which is testing through the roof. And so that, I think, is helping. Our case numbers aren't changing, but we're seeing fewer deaths, fewer hospitalizations. And so I think that that all reflects sort of the positive trend that we've seen of late, which doesn't mean that's what we're going to see for the next couple of weeks.
So one more reader question that we'll take, and then we can wrap up for the day. So the question is, will haunted houses be open this year? And that's one that I can answer, and Adelson, jump in if you have any more details. But the answer in short is yes, if they apply for a permit with the state. So that is one Halloween tradition that we'll be able to participate in this year. And we've already heard from some haunted houses in the New Orleans and the Baton Rouge area that they do plan to be open this year. So that is one area where Halloween will seem a bit like a normal Halloween, I think.
Scream quickly and get out, though. Don't terrifying things.
Yeah, masks will be involved as you would expect. But that is one area of Halloween that we'll have. So with that, we'll wrap up here for today. We really appreciate all of the reader questions today. Jeff Asher, Jeff Adelson, thank you. You all have a great day.
Thank you.